The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday, October 27th. I hope everybody's having a fantastic weekend. You know, I thought I'd skip today and get some rest and not do a show, but I woke up this morning and everything's so negative. Like, there's so much negativity. I'm so negative. I told you what I thought of Israel's attack on Iran yesterday. I'm very negative on that. It was ridiculous in many respects in terms of the long-term self-defense of Israel. So if you want more on that, you can go listen to yesterday's show. I talked about it a little bit there. But you know, and this election is just God. It's god awful, and it's the worst choice ever. But that's been true for the last 3 elections, right? It's Clinton, Trump, Biden, Trump, Kamala, Trump. I mean, there's no worse elections than those in terms of the people involved. The economy's, you know, the world is, the prospects of the future, not so great. And it just, the whole thing just sounds really, really terrible and bad. And yet, you know, you wake up in the morning and open up the window and the sun is shining and people are out at the beach and life seems to go on and life's pretty good. It's pretty good, and so it got me thinking. You know, what's going on here, and so I want to talk about the positives that are going on in the world right now, including the negatives that, from a different perspective, are actually positives. Not full positives, not the positives that we could have, but positive nonetheless, better than nothing. And particularly with the war and everything, I mean, there's so much you can say about the war, right? The war, how it's going, what is happening, what it's doing. But, you know, there's some positives. Deruski says Milei. Milei's too easy. It's too easy to be positive about Milei. No, I want to be positive about the war with Iran. I want to be positive about China and the United States. And I even want to be positive about the economy and everything else. One of Freeman says he still has electricity and water still runs. This is all good. So here's the thing. When I focus on, for example, so let's take yesterday's example because I think it's an important example of the Israeli attack on Iran. I think is a really good example of clearly the negative view I have on it. It just wasn't that big of a deal. They could have done so much more. Now, it turns out they've taken out their ballistic missile production capabilities. They've taken out some of their drone production capabilities. You know, they've set them back a little bit, and it's going to take Iran a lot of money and a lot of effort and a lot of time to rebuild those things. And in the meantime, they're going to have a hard time supplying the Russians with drones. But I think they've already built factories in Russia for them to build the drones, and they'll have a hard time with the ballistic missiles. Yeah, you could view that as all positive, but I don't, because here was this unbelievable opportunity to really, really, really devastate the Iranians and set the table up for a revolution maybe inside Iran. And none of that is going to happen, and that's what depresses me. What depresses me is what could have been. But there's another aspect of this that's, you know, quite positive. And it's not quite positive, but not surprising. And maybe this is the thing. Maybe I can't get excited about this because I expect it. It's just not surprising to me. It's just, I've been talking about this for years. I've been telling you about it for years. But maybe we just need to step back a minute and focus on it because it is worth focusing on. And we'll try to get to the bigger picture as we go along here. And I don't know how long today's show might be short. I don't know how much I have to say about all this. And we'll see how much you guys want to support me financially as part of it. But here's the thing that is truly astounding about what happened in Iran the other day. Now, basically, Iran was shown to be unequivocally, unquestionably, a paper tiger. Worse than a paper tiger, a nothing. From a defense capability, from a military capability, there's no there. Now, I've been telling everybody I can talk about this for 25 years. I've been saying Iran is a nothing. Right? There's nothing there. The technology sucks. The missiles can't hit their targets. Then Israel is like light years ahead of the Iranians when it comes to weapon systems technology and motivation and fighting capacity and fighting ability. Iran is a much, much, much bigger country, population-wise, and potentially has a bigger military, and potentially could have a lot more wealth because they have all that oil. And yet the Israeli military is by far not even close superior to the Iranians. And people were worried about the United States going up against the Iranians. Oh God, the Iranians are tough. And I would ridicule that. But what the Israelis showed on Saturday or Friday night, you can't argue with anymore. Basically, the Iranians have no ability to protect the airspace above Iran. None. They're using the best systems they have. S-300s that are being upgraded. It's an old system, but it's been upgraded. Better software, better radars, better everything. And they got nothing to show for it. Nada. The ballistic missiles, when they shot to Israel, we know what happened there. Most of them get knocked out of the sky. And the others miss the target. You know, Iranian airplanes didn't even go up into the sky to challenge the Israelis because they knew exactly what would happen. Now, supposedly, Iran has S-400 systems. I don't know if that's true or not. It's the latest and greatest Soviet system. Maybe there's even an S-500 somewhere in the world. Russian system, sorry, not Soviet. But who cares? There are S-400s in Syria. They've never been turned on. Because everybody knows, I think, that they would fail. But if they actually fail, then Russia's going to look really, really bad and won't be able to sell any systems to anybody. So it doesn't want to actually engage. So what we saw on Friday night was two different systems. Two different political systems, two different economic systems, and the consequence. What we saw on Friday, as if we need another example. But what the hell? We'll take more examples. You know, maybe one of these examples will finally hit home. Maybe. I don't know. What we saw on Friday is how impotent evil is, how weak it is, how incompetent it is, how backward it is, how primitive it is. They just don't have it. They cannot take on a tiny little country like Israel. Now, Israel gets support from the U.S., but okay, but it's still tiny. And the support is that big as compared to the oil revenues of Iran. And the superpower that is helping Iran is Russia. Now, again, we should know this by now, right? In the first and second day of the war of Russia against Ukraine, I told you that Russia's going to have a really, really, really hard time because they're using really, really, really bad weapon systems, because they have a shitty economy. They have a state. They have bad incentives. They just run badly in every aspect of it. They have no freedom. They have no technology, and the technology is backward. Their weapon systems are backward. Everything about their system is backwards. And yeah, they failed. They failed to win a quick victory in Ukraine, which everybody expected. Everybody expected, except those people who understand the impotence of evil. There's no innovation in Russia. I mean, one of the most shocking things about the war between Ukraine and Russia is the fact that Russia does not dominate the airspace. If it did dominate the airspace, Ukraine wouldn't have a chance. But it doesn't, because it doesn't take that much to deny the Russians the airspace. You just have to have decent air defense systems, like a Patriot system or something like that. And the Russians just can't overcome it. Israel can overcome the best air defense system of the Russians. The United States can certainly overcome the best air defense system of the Russians. The Russians cannot overcome even a second or third rate air defense system of the West. So what we're seeing war-wise is, unsurprising to those of us who've been following, to those of us who are engaged, and those of us who understand how these things work, unsurprising to any of us, unfree countries produce bad results, bad product. What was the name of the automobile the Soviets built, the Russians built under the Soviet Union? I forget. It sucked. Why would their weapon systems be any better? The West can take on the enemies, its enemies, like that. And that should be celebrated. The Yugo, the Yugo and the Lada, and the Trabant. They had 3 different cars. I think the Yugo was Yugoslavia, maybe. The Lada was maybe Czechoslovakia. Trabant, I don't know. But anyway, they're all Eastern Europe under Soviets, and they sucked. The West has a massive technological advantage over them. Massive. And not surprising, because the West has relative freedom. Relative, not great. Not anywhere near what we'd like, but some. And a little bit of freedom goes a long way, which is the theme of what we're going to be talking about today. So if you look at the military conflicts in the world today, you've got a country like Ukraine fighting a world power, Russia. Russia has 100 million plus population. It has invested decades, centuries really, in its military strategy. Its military is its pride and joy. And you've got a half-baked country called Ukraine. It's poor, desperate, nothing much, but it has Western weapons. And it's basically standing up to Russia and holding its own. It's not winning, partially because the Western weapons have, limitations on how they can be used, and they're not delivered on time, and all kinds of other political BS. But they're holding their own. And they've actually invaded Russia and taken Russian land. Pretty amazing. Why? Because Russia's unfree. It has bad technology, bad weapons, and unmotivated soldiers. Ukraine has a little bit of freedom, but it is supported by countries that have a little bit more freedom. And that freedom produces great technology. By the way, Ukraine is at a point right now where they're producing their own drones. They're producing much better drones than the Russians have, much better drones than the Iranians are producing. And they're causing a lot of damage to the Russians using their own drones, Ukrainian produced, because there's more freedom in Ukraine. And because there's more freedom, there's more motivation. Ukrainians know what they're fighting for. Russians don't. Ukrainians do. So even in a confrontation with a world power that has more atomic bombs than needed to destroy the entire planet, a little country like Ukraine, relatively small country like Ukraine, can stand up to them and hold its own. That is because of a little bit of freedom. In Israel, you've got Iran, the mighty Iran that is developing nuclear weapons and has all these weapon systems that are homemade. They're so good that they're sending them to the Russians. And they've got the Russians send weapons back. So that you've got here a country that has Russian airplanes, and it has Russian air defense systems, and it has Russian weaponry, and it sucks. It can't protect itself against a tiny little country of 9.8 million people who can put the Air Force into the sky and basically had F-35s flying over Tehran with nothing. They couldn't touch them. Couldn't touch them. And then, and this is, I think, the kicker, then you look at China. And you ask yourself, what is China thinking right now? Now, we hear a lot of commentary saying, oh, China is ready to invade Taiwan because look at how weak the West is. And the West is weak. It's weak-willed. The West is very weak-willed. It's not willing to fight. It's not willing to actually live up to its abilities. But China has to be looking at this and saying to themselves, God, if Ukraine can stand up to Russia, if Israel can stand up to Iran and by proxy stand up to Russia, then is taking Taiwan going to be that easy? And if Japan and South Korea join, Japan and South Korea have really advanced technologies, have military technologies that are really advanced. They are relatively free countries. And not to mention, if the US joins, the Chinese feel like they have a huge army. They have the biggest navy in the world. They have lots of planes, and they have a lot of missiles, lots of missiles, some of them really, really fast. And you could argue that they feel like they're technologically advanced. They've done a lot of good technological stuff. But are they? Really? That's all on paper. When they watch how easily Russian air defense systems are dissipated, are their air defense systems that much better? How do they know? How are they sure? When they watch Israel knock down ballistic missile after ballistic missile, does Taiwan have that capability? Does Japan? Does South Korea? Do the aircraft carriers in the U.S. fleet have those capabilities? So while Taiwan was always going to be difficult because it's a hard place to land, it's a tough geography to navigate and to take over, the bigger issue now is China's looking at the West and saying, maybe they're not willing to use the weapons to actually achieve victory. But God, they have good weapons. And those weapons are incredibly capable, battle-tested. One of the things that I found just amazing was a report I read yesterday, I think, about like the U.S. military, Pentagon, is like looking at what Israel did in Iran and saying, it looked like our weapon systems actually work. Because they don't know. They've never tested them. They've never flown F-35s into S-300 territory. They've never flown and used their weapon systems in an actual war. And not really. I mean, they fought ISIS. They fought Iraq. Not exactly an enemy. Now, again, Iran is not exactly an enemy either, but Israel's trying out these systems. And, they flew 100 airplanes. I don't know if they all crossed the border into Iran, but 100 airplanes to very close to Iran. Every single one of the 100 airplanes returned home. Israel has a lot fewer refuelers than the United States does. It doesn't have many at all. I think 4 retooled Boeing 707s, for those who remember 707s. They don't even have the modern ones, the cool ones that the U.S. has. They flew 100 planes all the way to Iran. By the way, at the same time, other planes were bombing Beirut. Israel can multitask. And everybody went home. And the Americans are going, it's cool, our weapons work. Like, don't you know? Don't you know how good the tools that you're building are? Don't you know that if you take yourself seriously, you can defeat any enemy out there? Because I think the Chinese just realized that, if they didn't already realize it in the past. Because a lot of the Chinese weapon systems are based on weapon systems from the Soviet era. They're improved. So their fighter jets supposedly are based on actually Israeli plans for a fighter jet. Improved, but improved by Chinese. Unfree, unmotivated, uninspired. Because they live in a dictatorship. And untested. China has not fought a war since they invaded Vietnam, I don't know, in the 80s? Was that in the 80s? And that's pre-Chinese development. That's in the very early days. And that's pre-Vietnam becoming wealthier. I mean, they have no idea. They have no idea how good or bad their systems are, their processes are, the command control is. They don't know, other than in war games, if their systems can knock down planes out of the sky. They have no idea. I mean, look at the Russian Air Force. Can't even dominate the skies in Ukraine. I mean, Israel would devastate them completely. They would never be able to fly over Israel. So when it comes to military, my guess right now is that the only other player is really China. That China is stepping back and saying, whoa, we need more prep. We need to make sure our weapons work. We need to make sure they're matching up to these Israeli and American weapons. And while we re-prep, no question the Americans and the Israelis are going to get better. So what exactly, can we really match them? And the answer is probably not. Not as long as China remains an authoritarian state. And if it stops being an authoritarian state, who cares? It doesn't need a match. Why would they go to war? With whom exactly? So the positive here is we're getting more concrete evidence. Again, you could argue we don't really need it because there's so much of it. I'll take more concrete evidence. We're getting more concrete evidence of the efficaciousness of freedom, even a little bit of it. We're getting more concrete evidence of the complete bankruptcy, the complete, impotence of the bad guys. And some of the bad guys, I think what happens in these situations is the bad guys probably realize this faster than the good guys. And maybe what happened in Iran is a bit of a deterrence on the Chinese. Maybe. My guess is it's certainly a deterrence around all the other Arab countries. Of course, there the situation is different because what happens if Egypt decides it wants to invade Israel and Egypt has 100% now American weapon systems? That's a tricky one, huh? That's interesting. I still think I know who wins, but still. Notice that Egypt is like, what Egypt has a population of 100 million people, 10 times the population of Israel. And when it's fought Israel in the past, it's lost pretty decisively. And it wasn't all technology. A lot of it's just motivation and smarts. So when it comes to war, freedom gives you an upper hand. Freedom gives you an upper hand. Now, and the pessimistic, the negative aspect of this is, if only those behind freedom, if only those who advocate for freedom, believe in freedom, will live under freedom, realize that, and were willing to actually win, the world would be a completely different place. Completely different place. So, kind of sad. What about What about in other realms? Well, this is true in other realms as well. I did a story Friday, I think, on the economies of China, the EU, and the United States. And I'm not even mentioning Russia or other places, which are much worse. Right? Countries that don't have freedom, they don't have elements of capitalism, they don't have some elements of freedom, those countries are, pathetically poor. Their economies are struggling to survive. And yes, they might be able to spend a lot of money producing weapons, i.e. Russia, but their citizens are in deep, deep doo-doo. Their life sucks. Their standard of living, quality of life sucks. Innovation, technology within their countries suck. They can only advance by copying or by stealing, getting around sanctions, which is what Russia is very good at doing. So Russian economy is terrible. In spite of everything you read about it, it's terrible. We've got 9% inflation, 15% interest rates. In order to keep it only at 9%, they have to have 15% interest rates. And quality of life, standard of living, is going down. It always does during war. China economy is struggling. It took on a huge, it took on a huge amount of debt and refocused itself in order to avoid the great financial crisis. And a lot of people said, look how China did so well during the great financial crisis. Look how it recovered fast. Look generally, during the 2000 and 20 teens, everybody was envious of the Chinese economy. Indeed, so many economists and public figures said, there's a new model. It's not socialism, it's not capitalism, it's the Chinese model. It's some mixture of central planning with freedom, but it's guided capitalism, or they called it state capitalism. State capitalism is what China is. And yeah, there was a period there where everybody thought this was it, this finally found it. And a lot of people were advocating for state capitalism in the United States. Indeed, Biden, who seems to be slow and late to everything, embraced that and tried to implement central planning in the U.S. As part of this, let's learn from China model. Well, it turns out that Chinese model doesn't work. It funneled, because of the way the Chinese system is and the way, they stimulated the economy coming out of the great financial crisis and the way they had to stimulate the economy to keep growing at high rates. They created a situation where there was massive amounts of debt, massive amounts of overproduction in places like real estate and infrastructure. Now, it's true that the federal government, the central government of China doesn't have a lot of debt, but that's because it outsourced its debt creation to local governments. And local governments are in unbelievable amounts of debt. And they have no revenue. Taxes all go to the central government. And Chinese citizens who thought real estate could only go up, sound familiar? And who kept buying real estate because that was the way you made money, are stuck with real estate that is not worth as much as they thought it was, as much as they paid for it. And they're stuck with down payments on real estate that was never built. Who knows if it'll ever be built. And the Chinese economy is struggling. Yes, they manufacture large quantities of goods. They don't make much money from that. They don't make much profits, and therefore they don't get much tax revenue. And so it doesn't generate that much. And it's like they have to keep it going, even at a loss, because they can't afford the unemployment. But even then, unemployment among young people in 16 to 25, I think it is something like way over 20%. It's massive. People worry here about young people are not working and sitting in their mother's basement. It's much worse. I mean, multiples of the American situation in China. That can't be good. And it's certainly not good for the economy. And why? It's obvious. Because while for a long time they were progressing onto a path of greater and greater freedom, they stopped. And they never embraced full freedom. So they were always this mixture. And they never embraced political freedom. So the political freedom ultimately trumped the economic freedom, and they stopped becoming freer economically. And they reverse course. They become less free economically, and guess what happens? So we've got another data point, another one, as if we needed it, but another one. And then Europe. Europe is stagnating. It's barely growing. It's barely grown for 16 years, since the great financial crisis. And people are coming around to the same conclusion. People are basically coming around to the conclusion that the reason Europe is stagnating is because it's overregulated. It's over-controlled. It doesn't encourage entrepreneurs. There's no innovation. It's not free enough. I mean, even like conventional economists are coming to that conclusion. Now, they don't go all the way, but there's another data point. Even in Europe, advanced societies, highly educated, super productive economies like Germany's, if you regulate, if you control, if you stagnate intellectually in terms of not thinking about the future but doing everything based on the past, if you organize your models around big industrial companies and not around entrepreneurship and innovation, you will die. Or you will die, you'll die slowly. You won't die all at once. Germany's not dying, but it is stagnating. It is decaying. It is struggling. And then you've got the United States, which relative to Europe and relative to China has a little bit more freedom. And everybody right now is just amazed at the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy is doing better than the Europeans. It has. For the last 16 years, it has way outperformed Europe. I mean, GDP per capita, wealth in America is way up as compared to Europeans. I mean, it was already above Europe going into the great financial crisis. And since then, that has accelerated. The United States, people are still getting richer. There's innovation. There's new products. There's new companies. There's entrepreneurship. It's a dynamic economy. In spite of everything. In spite of the taxes and the regulations and all that. A little bit more freedom than Europe. And a little bit more freedom than China produces a little bit more economic growth. Wow. Who would have thunk that? Completely unexpected. And it's true, as some people will tell you, that a lot of the economic growth in the United States is funded and fueled by debt. We take on huge quantities of debt. But why are people willing to lend us money? They're willing to lend us money because they know, at some level, that the U.S. system, as flawed and problematic as it is the best around, and it usually finds a way out because it's oriented around value creation. The world knows this at some level. That's why they're willing to use dollars. That's why the dollar is the reserve currency. That's why we're willing to buy out debts. That's why they're interested in investing in our stock market. That's why they buy American companies. Freedom works. Even a little bit. A little bit more works a little bit more. And in a world where, a lot of countries have become less free, even the United States has become less free, we are doing better than the rest because we're a little bit more free than the rest. So none of this is new. But it's good to remember that reality is on our side. And this is the real positive message. Right? Reality is on our side. If you do irrational things, bad stuff happens. If you reject liberty and freedom, bad stuff happens. If you move towards authoritarianism, bad stuff happens. If you're run by a dictator, bad stuff happens. You can't win. And the flip side of that is the same, is true. To the extent that you have a little bit of freedom, good stuff happens. To that extent that you're rational, good things happen. To the extent that you allow your markets to function, good things happen. To the extent that you have innovation and progress and allow for entrepreneurship and innovation, not only do good things happen in the civilian space, but that translates into better weapon systems, better technologies on the weapon side, and you can defend yourself better, you can defeat your enemies better. In every realm of life, this is true. It's even shockingly true for the individual. To the extent that you're irrational in your life, to that extent your life will suck. To the extent that you're rational, to that extent your life will be good. To the extent that you're willing to take risks, rational risks, and grow and constantly pursue new values and push the envelope and go for new goals and new frontiers, to that extent, your life will be good. To the extent that you settle, to the extent that you accommodate, to the extent that you stagnate, you will stagnate. Life will suck. So these principles, the Yaron rules for life, apply to the geopolitics. They don't just apply to individual life. They apply to geopolitics. And I know none of this helps you with who to vote for. None of this helps you with the next 4 years, no matter who wins. But maybe if we point these things out, if we make a big deal out of them, if we advocate in spite of the choices, if we don't let the political choices that we face dictate our lives, and instead we say it like it is, then maybe we can start pushing and pushing and pushing and pointing out, here's a concrete, here's a concrete, here's a concrete. Freedom is good. Lack of freedom is bad. Over and over and over again in every realm possible, from the military to the economy to your personal life to everything else. Maybe then you can have an impact. Because, right now, our entire politics is driven by negatives. Our entire politics is driven by fear. Our entire politics is driven by hatred. Hatred of immigrants, hatred of the Chinese, hatred of, other people taking our jobs, fear of the Chinese, fear of immigrants, fear of elites, fear of the left, fear of the right. Fear is everywhere. What drives us is fear. What drives us is negativity. What drives us is the sense that it's all over. And if we can just reorient ourselves and focus on, there's some positives in the world. The good guys win in these cases, and these technologies get produced, and these things are happening that are all positives. If we go out there and talk about the positives and talk about, how does this happen? It happens because there's still some freedom in the world. It happens because rationality wins out once in a while. It happens because there are good people out there. It happens because of the human mind. When it's allowed to be free, there are no limits. So stop being afraid and start focusing on the positives. Stop being afraid and start teaching your fellow man about what it takes to build, what it takes to create, what it takes to change the world. And again, this is true, internally. It's still true that tech is relatively low regulation. So you're seeing this boom in AI, which is going to have profound impact on our lives. Positive. Although everybody will highlight all the negatives, because fear of AI is also driving a lot of our politics right now. People are going to lose their jobs. Or look at biotech, which is heavily regulated, but people are highly motivated. And therefore, huge amount of money, huge amount of resources, lots of minds going into it. And God, the innovation, the progress, the step forward, they're just astounding and exciting in terms of what is going to be possible in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And that's because we're still a little free. There's very little innovation in biotech going on anywhere else. So celebrate the good. Celebrate the success of the rational. Celebrate the failure of the irrational. Celebrate the impotence of evil. And focus on that. And I know we're in the peak of political season. It doesn't really matter. Really, I prefer Donald Trump not win. It matters in that sense, and it matters to the speed at which things get worse. But in the long scope of history, or even of your life, it doesn't matter that much. What really matters is, will the good, will the rational stand up and fight? Will the good, will the rational stand up and declare its values and understand why life is so good on this planet right now? Right. All right, guys, that is my little spiel for this Sunday afternoon. A little bit of geopolitical positivism. The bad guys can't win. The good guys can lose, but the bad guys cannot win. The bad guys cannot win. And the good guys have to make an effort to lose. They really have to go out of their way to lose, because that's how big the difference is. All right, we don't have a lot of questions, so we can make this a very short show today. That's fine. But if you do have Super Chat questions, please feel free to jump in. I will mention that, we have a couple of sponsors for the show. One is is Alex Epstein, who is one of those positive forces in the world that, the one real positive that would happen in a Trump administration is the influence that Alex could have on energy policy and on the people in that administration. So Alex is doing amazing work in bringing the ideas of reason and rationality, freedom, liberty, to the field of energy and environmentalism and God, why is this not working? If you want to be part of what he's doing, right? If you want to help promote it, help advance it, if you want to gain the knowledge that Alex has, well, the way to do that is to subscribe to his Substack, where you get talking points that you can use on your family, on your friends, on your enemies, on whoever, on anybody you want to get into debate for, standing up for the good, standing up for the positive, standing up for fossil fuels, for example. Alex's talking points are just amazing. He knows what the issues of the day are because he deals with them every day, and he communicates how to communicate the alternative. Sign up at alexepstein.substack.com, alexepstein.substack.com. yaron.substack.com and to get those talking points. All right. The Ayn Rand Institute is another sponsor, and they're right now taking up scholarship applications for the Ayn Rand Con in Europe. I know they're still doing it for the US, and they're still doing it, I think, for Brisbane, Australia, but for sure, the one they just opened up is Berlin, Germany. It's going to be March 14th to 16th in Berlin, Germany. If you are in Europe, and I know I have a lot of listeners in Europe, Berlin is relatively cheap to fly to, one of the reasons it was picked. It's a fun city for young people. There's a lot going on in Berlin. So you should sign up. It's a great opportunity to actually delve deeper into the ideas of Ayn Rand. You'll have a chance to meet and study with prominent objectivist intellectuals like Ankur Gate, Nikos, and I just heard that Tara Smith is going to be there in Berlin. So you'll also have Tara Smith. And you'll be able to hang out with them socially. You'll take classes with them, hear lectures, Q&As, discussion groups. These are incredibly valuable. I was at the one in Amsterdam last year, and it was amazing. I think some of you were there, and we had a really good time. I think this should be fantastic. So, yeah, and if you're serious about studying objectivism, then you could probably get a scholarship. So apply at aynrand.org/start here. aynrand.org/start here to apply for a scholarship. Once you're there on the page, you can also see you might be able to apply for the one in Australia. You certainly apply for the one in Austin, Texas in February. But for you Europeans, the one in Berlin, March 14th to 16th, you should all be going, and many of you could get a scholarship. Flights, hotel, and tuition. Pretty cool deal. All right, let's jump in to the questions. The W.R. Brown, thank you, $100. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Let's see. One day, when future intellectuals look back on the great minds commenting these times, they will find a heroic voice promoting reason and positivity. I don't listen as much as I'd like to, but it is always refreshing to listen to a thoroughly rational perspective. Thank you. I mean, I really appreciate that. I hope that I'm having the kind of impact that will manifest itself in people looking back and identifying me as a voice. I don't know that I am, but I hope that's true. And I certainly aspire to do that. We've got to find a way to grow the show and get the numbers dramatically up. But I still haven't figured that one out. I've tried short videos, I've tried other videos, but we're still where we are. So anybody have ideas on how we can take this to the next level or to 5 levels further, then contact me, yaron@yaronbrookshow.com, because I think I produce here real valuable content that a lot of people should be engaged with at however often they can listen to it. Yeah, we need a marketing manager. We need real marketing. We need somebody to do real marketing. So if anybody has the knowledge, has the capacity, has the capabilities, would like to take on a role on, let me know. I don't know how much I can pay, but let me know. I don't need a manager for the shows. I need a marketing manager. I need somebody who can. Wanda Freeman says you're on travel logs. God, you really think that would take off? If I stuck my phone in front of my face and here I am at the airport and this is what's going on. I just can't imagine it. I've got these trips coming up. Maybe I should try it. I don't know. Should I start a new channel called Yaron Travelogues? Or should I just use the existing channel and just create a playlist for Yaron Travelogues? Anyway, I am interested in ideas and interested in a serious, I'm not going to mountain climb in New Zealand, a serious marketing professional who knows what they're doing and could help grow this thing. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this. Please consider signing up for the live stream of my event in Denver next 2 weeks, week and a half, which will be post-election, 2 days after the election. I think it's going to be really fascinating. we're gonna try to make it positive in terms of looking out what are the positive things that could be done, looking into the future, no matter who wins. I don't know if we'll know who the president is at that point, but it's going to be interesting. I have objective news, though. My news updates every day is objective news. That's exactly what we're doing, right? So I do that, right? Daily news. Every single day I do it, 5 days a week. So please sign up for that live stream. You can find the URL on either my website, yaronbrookshow.com, or Defenders of Capitalism.com. Defenders of Capitalism.com. If you scroll down, you'll find the event. You'll find a link to the live stream of it. You want me to label it objective news? You think that'll make a difference? You think somebody, I don't have 100,000 subscribers because it's not labeled right. I just find it hard to believe. And objective news with Yaron is like I've eaten up so much of the real of the title. If you've noticed, I've taken the daily news and put it at the end so they can lead with the actual stories. This is why I need a marketing manager to take all these ideas and figure out which one works and maybe do some A/B testing and figure this out. Because I don't know. I'm not a marketing guy. I don't know why people watch my show. I don't. And you guys are relatively dedicated because you're here on the chat and you watch it live and everything. That's a tiniest minority of people who watch it live, right? Most of the people watch it after the fact. So overwhelming majority, live, we might have in and out, 400 people coming in and out, 600, 800. But then another 2,000 to 3,000 watch it after the fact, and then another 2,000 listen to it on a Yeah, you can't send me to somebody else's website and say, do what he does, because the content is so different. Again, if you're going to do marketing, you've got to think about what is the differences in content. My audience is different than Gary, whatever his name is. I can't pronounce his family name, Vaynerchuk. Different content, different audience, different target audience. I need a real marketing professional come and say, okay, here's your target audience. Let's figure out how to get to them, and let's figure out how to. I'm not going to change the show dramatically. How are we going to pitch it? How are we going to change the title of it? How are we going to change the background? How are we going to do this to maximize? Oh, wow, another $100 from the W. Brown. Thank you. Have you given any thought on the effect of state-required marriage has on male and female relationships? It's starting to become evident it's having an adverse effect on commit to that type of relationship. But I think that would be a great topic to bring to viewers. I think it is an interesting topic. Of course, the state, one way or the other, has always regulated marriage, right? Usually through its religious institutions. So there's nothing new about it. There is an issue of, as the religious nature of the religious character of marriage dissipates, what role should the state have? And, I think zero. And what negative role is it having by sticking around? And here a lot of the negative role has probably more to do with divorce and family law and things like that. And those, I have to say, are complicated issues, right? In a free market, you would have common law that regulated that, because, and there would be contracts, but contracts wouldn't specify every possible outcome. So even if you had a contract, a legal contract, which was the marriage, it would be based on a certain acceptable legal framework, unless in the contract you specify differently. You can do that today with a prenup, but you would still rely on certain common law assumptions. Legislatures would still have to legislate. So the question is, to what extent is the law here the problem? To what extent is And the law is a problem, but how to fix it is tricky. And to what extent is our failed ability to conceptualize masculinity and femininity and a proper relationship between men and women responsible for the problems that we're seeing around marriage and divorce and just generally male-female relationships. And I suspect this issue about masculinity, femininity, and the role of men and women, and how do you relate to the other sex, and what is the purpose, what is the value of these relationships, what's the value of sex? These are the really deep philosophical questions that are needed. And then, yeah, I agree that a rational view of marriage is desperately needed. I agree with that, not just from a legal perspective, but from a relationship perspective. And I think here you need a combination of philosophy and psychology, and somebody who has, I think, a deep understanding of femininity, masculinity, really given a thought. I'm not an expert. I can share my thoughts, and some of them will be controversial out there, but it really does. It is going to require a thinker who specializes in these kind of ideas, in these kind of issues, to apply objectivism to them. So I agree with you that an objectivist approach to marriage, an objectivist approach to relationships, an objectivist approach to sex and male, female. I mean, Ayn Rand gives us some hints and some indications, but she's never developed a complete theory of this, and somebody needs to. He says, but your only hope, Yaron. I hope not. I mean, I don't think that's true. I mean, you've got Gina Golan, I think, doing important, valuable work in psychology. I don't know if she's doing that work in with regard to femininity, masculinity, and issues of marriage. She's doing it to other relationships. But who knows in 20 years what she'll turn to. And she is writing a book right now in psychology, which I think is going to be, and it's being picked up by a huge publisher. And they've given her a big advance, which means they're going to spend a lot of money on pushing it out there, I hope. So there are people out there who are probably more qualified than I am to do this kind of work and to think about these kind of issues because they bring the psychology with them. And there are great thinkers out there. They're great philosophers out there that need to do this and need to write books. And look, there's a million topics we need to address urgently. And this is one of them, maybe one of the most important ones, but it's one of them. And we need the intellectual, as a movement, we need the intellectual firepower to do that. And that's where we will start having a real impact on the culture. And that's why I think the Institute with Ayn Rand University and the graduate program that it has is really, world-changing, really world-changing. Because if we can bring the firepower of all these intellectuals, if we can help shape these intellectuals and motivate people to follow intellectual careers and engage with these kind of ideas and challenge conventional wisdom and bring rationality to every sphere of life, we will change the world. We will change the world. And it's happening. It's just happening slower than any one of us would like. I'm sure we all can agree with that. Thank you, W.R. Brown. Really, really, really appreciate it. And it's a topic I'll definitely think more about and think about doing more on the show with it. Frank, Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats as a way to appeal to different perceptual drives of YouTubers jumping off from your positive show today. Okay, I've never read Edward de Bono, so I will copy paste this and add it here. I'm still going to argue and that I can't do it all. Somebody said I need a manager. I need somebody who knows marketing. I need somebody who knows this stuff, knows how to apply it, knows how to put it in practice, and lets me do my thing and then does their thing to grow this channel to hundreds of thousands or millions of people. That's what I need. Yeah. So, by the way, if you're watching the show right now and you're not a subscriber, click subscribe. I should do that more often, right? I should encourage people to subscribe because people do watch the show who are not subscribers, quite a few. And subscribe, press subscribe. I need division of labor. Wanda Freeman has it right. I need a young, ambitious, knowledgeable marketing guy who doesn't want to get paid a lot of money because they're independent and really wealthy, who is going to come on board and drive the Yaron Brook show into the stratosphere, at which point I'm willing to pay a lot of money. All right. Thank you, Frank. I'll check 6 thinking hats. I'll check it out. All right. Mike says, when I pass on some of the perspective I get from your show, my daughter says that I'm too much of an optimist. So you are overall positive. I think that's true. I think that's true, but yeah, shake up your daughter. She's young. She should be a lot more positive than I am, right? We get more negative as we get older, generally speaking. So if she's young, she should be the most optimistic. So I try. Oh, Mr. Brown again. Stay positive, Yaron. Reason always wins in the end. It does. I just want the end to be closer, not the end. You know, I don't want it to be too far in the future. It would be nice if it was sooner rather than later, right? That would be cool. Milko, I was commenting this morning on Luca's post about the BRICS summit. Think about it as it really is. An accord between dictators. What could be worse? You're right. Freedom and capitalism make huge differences at the roots. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Michael. I mean, the BRICS are impotent. So a bunch of impotent people get together and they join forces. Now it's a bigger impotent power. Now it's a bigger impotence. That's really what it is. And it used to be that, like, oh, they have natural resources. But look, I mean, the United States now produces more energy than it consumes in terms of oil, fossil fuels. If we actually were willing to develop, we have a lot of the rare earth type materials or rare materials that we're so dependent on some of these other parts of the world. We just need to be willing to actually produce them. Yeah, Wanda Freeman says, well, you could say 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 still equals 0. And in some cases, actually creates negativity because we know it's not a plus. We know that it's that they are. I'm sure they're going to undermine each other, and they're going to have little arguments and conflicts and problems because they're irrational. What are they going to work together? And their financial system won't exactly work, and it'll collapse, and who's to blame? And bad guys don't form really stable long-term coalitions. I mean, think about NATO as a defense organization that survived a long time and has expanded and grown and become, in that sense, much, much stronger because it's fundamentally an alliance between good people. I mean, good countries, relatively speaking, right? And it's one of the longest alliances ever, maybe in human history. Maybe it is the longest because of that. An alliance of bad guys, not going to survive very long. Daniel, I haven't been laser focused on politics since 2016. I used to be a leftist and voted for Bernie Sanders. A lot has changed in 8 years. I'm more concerned now with things I can control and value, I can achieve in my own life. Good for you. It's the message I've been giving you guys for years and years and years now. I don't know if I impacted you, Daniel, to change focus like this, but absolutely. I'm glad to see you're focused on your own values. That is the most important thing. Things that you can control in your own life. I mean, most of the point of my show today was to say, as long as good people are producing and doing good things and we have enough freedom to do that, good stuff will happen. Not as good as it would be if we were even more free. Any Ideas says, Yaron, I attended your talk at Durham University. A year ago, at Durham University. I don't remember Durham University. Where is Durham University? And was interested in what you had to say. How do you view the extensive... Oh, Durham in the UK. Of course, in northern UK. Sorry, I flaked on that one. How do you view the extensive immigration to the UK right now? Positive? I mean, it's a complicated answer. Complicated. I view it as potentially positive. Yes, Northeast England. I remember. I've spoken in Durham twice, and they won't be good. I've really enjoyed the audiences. They've been really, 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 smart and engaged. And I've really enjoyed my talks. I need to arrange, maybe next year, maybe 2025, I can come back to Durham. I'll work on that. Immigration to UK. And I'm doing this, that's not a super chat. I don't usually do that. I usually only answer questions that are super chat, but I'm doing it because you had my talk a year ago, and that's kind of cool. This is the problem. Immigration to the UK would be great if the UK was truly committed to integration, to assimilation, and to the rule of law. The problem in the UK is not the immigrants. The problem in the UK is, in a sense, the left who refuses to declare UK culture better than the immigrant culture, and the right who doesn't have a good argument against the left, and therefore can't implement anything better. So if the UK was willing to prosecute the immigrants for crimes they commit to the full extent of the law, no matter what race or ethnic background they came from, immigration would generally be good. If the UK was willing, if people in the UK and the intellectuals in the UK and the politicians in the UK were basically willing to say, you're welcome here, as long as you accept our culture, as long as you assimilate. Yeah, I mean, bring your food, please. We have shitty food in the UK, so please bring yours because it'll be better. But other than food, almost everything we have in the UK is better than what you have. By the way, that's why you're coming here, right? So leave your barbarism where it is and call it barbarism, and you're welcome. But if you bring your barbarism here, if you bring those ideas here, if you bring that behavior here, you'll either land up in jail for a very long time, or you will be deported. You will be put on planes and get out of here. So if you're going to disrupt traffic in London because you support a barbaric, primitive, murderous ideology like that of Hamas, then out you go. You're not welcome here. If you're going to advocate for Sharia law in the UK, you're not welcome here. You're not welcome here. So you've got to set a real standard, particularly with Muslim immigrants, of intolerance. Intolerance to their behavior. And under those circumstances, immigration is fantastic. Immigration is great. I mean, what's interesting in the UK is because of Brexit, the mixture of immigrants has changed. And before Brexit, you got more immigrants that came from Europe. And after Brexit, you're getting more immigrants who are coming from Muslim countries. Not a good trade-off, culturally. But the main thing is comply with the law. And to the UK politicians, persecute the criminals. Same in Sweden, same in the rest of Europe. If you tolerate violence, there'll be more of it. Just the way it is. If you tolerate barbaric culture, there'll be more barbaric culture. If you don't tolerate it, it will go away. But you've got to not tolerate it. And you've got to be very, very clear on the fact that you're not tolerating it and why you're not tolerating it. Advocate for violence, you're out. Commit violence, you're in jail for a very long time. Very, very long time. All right, back to our super chat. Thanks. Any ideas? Hope to see you again in Durham or wherever you are one day. Andrew, missed the show. Look forward to listening later. As ugly as politics are, never give up on values. They're possible and they're real for the achieving, for any creative mind willing to put forth the effort to create. Yes, although my positivity today was actually kind of about the world, not just about your values. So Robert says, positive episodes will always be a win for me, which I do not take for granted. I need to keep up with what's wrong in the world, but far more than that, I need to know that good people can live well and are living well, and that evil people live badly. I think that's important too. Andrew says, notice how boys and girls segregate themselves from each other when they're young. That should erode as a person individuates, but individuals teach tribal collectivism, men versus women. Does altruism factor into that? I don't know exactly what you're saying. So boys and girls segregate themselves from each other when they're young, and I think there are reasons for that, objective reasons for that. And I think there are real differences between men and women that cause a certain amount of segregation. And while it should erode, it won't go away completely as we individuate. Because there is something about being a man and there's something about being a woman that is different. It's also the case, for example, that while you can have friends of the opposite sex, there's a sense in which it's more difficult to have friends from the opposite sex because there's always a certain sexual tension there. So you can have, but there's only so close that you can get, I think. It's why typically a woman's best friend is another woman and a man's best friend another man. And I don't think that's collectivism. So there is something, in terms of who we are. I mean, it's not necessary, but it's pretty dominant, and I don't think it's because of collectivism. There's also, we tend to be different, men and women, in terms of focus, in terms of orientation, in terms of the things that interest us. For a variety of different reasons, we tend to be different. Now, some of that's socialization, some of that is collectivism, some of that is everything else. I'm not sure how altruism fits in here, although whenever you have collectivism, altruism, is somewhere. But the shared interests and values in concrete form, for the most part, are different. Now, there's overlap. There's certain men who have very strong shared interest with certain women, and men and women generally have shared interest in certain realms, but there's also differences. Right? Wanda Freeman says, I don't enjoy shopping for clothes. Jennifer says, I love shopping. And I'm sure there's some men who love shopping. I know men who love shopping. Right? I hate shopping. I particularly hate shopping for clothes. But there's certain men who love shopping for clothes. So there's all kinds of overlaps in values. But there's more overlap between men than there is between men and women. There's more overlap between women than there's women and men. It's just a fact. It doesn't mean you can't have a best friend who's of the opposite sex. It's completely possible. But it's going to be more unusual because of the lack of overlap. And the lack of overlap is driven by certain biological facts about our nature. It doesn't, it doesn't change the fact that women and men can be as competent in lots of realms, but in some realms they're not going to be as competent. Sports, for example. So again, the whole male-female thing, marriage, sex, relationships, tricky. Frank says, is Cuba a shithole because of embargo or socialism? I mean, I'm sure I've talked about this recently. I mean, what does an embargo have to do with it? Right? Indeed, Trump would say the embargo would make Cuba richer I mean, that's what Trump wants. Trump wants an embargo on America, so America produce everything, right? Isn't that what he wants? He wants to stop importing things, so we produce everything locally. So and his argument is we're richer that way. Now, he's wrong, so the embargo does have an impact. But the embargo is an American embargo. European tourists come to Cuba. Cuba is traded with Russia, it trades with Venezuela, it trades with lots of countries. It trades with Mexico. So it doesn't trade with the United States. Big deal. Why would trade with one country, even the biggest, most important country in the world, why would trade with one country cause you to be a shithole country? I mean, there's no question. And why is it that other socialist countries are also shitholes? So, I mean, this is a no-brainer. It's just a no-brainer. Because other socialist countries are also shitholes. And one country you take out of the supply chain and suddenly your whole economy collapses? It's bizarre. It means something's wrong with your country. Wyatt516 says, when you talk to liberty groups like AIER, do you have a standard opening about where you disagree and why you're not sanctioning them? No, because I am sanctioning them. By the very fact that I'm there, I'm sanctioning them. So the disagreement becomes very obvious during my talk. There's, it becomes very obvious during the Q&A, and it's obvious throughout. So, no, if I, the very fact of my presence in front of a group like that means I'm sanctioning them. The idea that I'm not is ridiculous. I hate you guys. You guys are absolutely ridiculous, stupid, and evil, and I shouldn't really be up on stage here because I don't want to sanction you, but because I don't, that doesn't make any sense. So I'm sanctioning them. I'm saying that a group like AIER is a legitimate group. It doesn't mean I agree with everything. It means they're legit. They're not so evil as to I won't even appear at their events. Some groups are so evil, I won't appear at their events. Like I wouldn't go give a talk at the von Mises Institute, which should be called the Rothbard Institute, as I've said many times. James, I know you do not like either. However, in the event you were to choose one to live, do you pick Egypt or Turkey? Are either of them heading in the right direction towards freedom in any way? No, neither of them are. But Turkey is heading towards despotism faster. Not just despotism, antagonism to the West, hostility to the West. I think Egypt is run by the military, which is not good, but it's a military that generally has realized, because Egypt has firsthand experience, that the West is better than the East. It's better to be on America's side than to be on Russia's side. It's better not to fight Israel because you lose. Turkey doesn't have that experience yet. Although, again, what Israel did to Iran should cause Turkey to pause, put it that way, right? So I would say Turkey's worse. Turkey is also explicitly Islamist in its regime. Egypt is explicitly secular in its regime. Now, the Egyptian people are religious, but the regime won't allow that to be expressed politically, not in a significant way. Not like it was during the Muslim Brotherhood when they ruled Egypt for a very short period of time. So I would have to say Turkey's worse, heading in the worst direction. Thanks, James. All right, let's do some stickers here. By the way, we're $8 short of our goal, so if somebody wants to jump in with $8, that would just be nice. Carolina, thank you for the sticker. Let's see, did we have any others? Again, thank you to Frank for $100, and thank you to Mr. Brown for the $200 questions. 220, I think, overall. Carolina, another sticker. Is Carolina the only sticker person here? Keep going back. I'm going back. Let's see. We've got John Parker, thank you. We've got Stephen Hopper, thank you. And we've got Donna, thank you, and Daruski, thank you. All right, so we had a number of stickers. Really, really appreciate those of you who did stickers. And finally, we have Jason. Jason says, what is the argument against country X receiving 100% tariff? What is the argument against country X receives 100% tariff? So it devalues the currency 100 to 1. USD to 20x to 1 USD, as Mexico has done at times over time, with little noticeable impact to the U.S. So I don't understand, right? It's just confusing grammar. So let's say the United States puts 100% tariff on Mexico, right? So any goods coming into the United States from Mexico, you pay a 100% tax on them. Note that the tax is in dollars. So let's say what Mexico does is it devalues its currency. It makes its currency worth fewer dollars. How does that help them? Well, it makes it easier for Americans to buy Mexican products because we have our currency is worth more, so we get it cheaper, and then if it doubles, we get the old price back. So you're exactly right. That would wipe out the effect on tariffs for prices in the U.S. if that happened. But of course, devaluing the currency has massive impacts on the economy generally. That is, it's not a one-off thing where it doesn't have other consequences. How do you devalue your currency, right? You can put capital controls and then force that value to be exist. But how would you, in the marketplace, cause your currency to be half what it was to the dollar? The only real way to do that is, in a sense, to increase the quantity of that currency. That is, to devalue its local purchasing power. So, and even if you didn't have to do it by doubling it, you'd still have to do it to some extent. So the process of devaluing your currency is a process by which you are causing harm to your own economy. You're making your export goods cheaper for the purchasing power. And the funny thing is, you're not going to get any extra purchasing power, extra exports. You're going to get the same because all you've done is brought it up to the same level of exports as before. And yet domestically, you have created inflation, you've created malinvestment, you've created distortions. Now, what actually happens with tariffs, and let me see if I remember after this is not just available for me in my subconscious, I have to actually think it through. If tariffs go up, right? Tariffs go up, and so I'm importing less. Let's take Mexicans. I'm importing less from Mexico, right? But Mexicans still want dollars. Remember, they export to us because they want the dollars. Then how do they get those dollars? Well, what they do is they go out into the marketplace and they start buying the dollars with their local currency. What happens if you go out and buy dollars with your local currency? What happens to the exchange rate? Right? What happens to the exchange rate is what Jason is proposing. That is, the local currency gets weakened as compared to the dollar. Now, it doesn't get weakened to the same extent as the tariff is placed. It's not a one-on-one. But some of the effect of the tariff in reducing imports is wiped out by exactly the effect that you're suggesting, Jason, by the devaluation of the local currency. And that devaluation happens because locals who were selling to Americans in order to get dollars now go into the marketplace and buy dollars. And by going into the marketplace and buying dollars, are devaluing their own currency. They don't devalue it to the same extent to wipe out the whole effect of a tariff. That would take too much, and it would wipe out too much of their local value. But so it happens automatically, and that's one of the reasons tariffs don't really reduce trade deficits that much. They don't, because the currencies adjust to some extent. And all you're left with is a higher tax for Americans. The Americans are paying a tax to the federal government, but the dollar is getting artificially stronger for no good reason. All right, James, thank you, James. Have you seen race relations change since 2020 in EU and the US? It appears people have become more groupthink. An example is white men for Harris Group or Latinos for Trump. Indians in my state were much more open in the past. I agree completely. The world has become much more tribal. I'd say since 2010, since 2014, because that tribalism led to Trump winning in 2016. So I think that racial tribalism has been on the increase since the mid-2010s. And it's a consequence of the identitarian theories that are coming out of the universities that have impacted the left, which has then gotten a backlash from the right, from whites on the right. And it's become much more acceptable since Black Lives Matter, but even before that, to make your racial, whatever you want race to be, identification much more out in the open and much more explicit. So yes, that kind of race, I'm identified by my race, has become much more prevalent in the United States over the last 10 years. Much more. Which is unbelievably sad for the land of individualism. And one of the main things driving us towards evil. Of course, DEI, affirmative action, really affirmative action has been chipping away and driving this since it was installed in the late 1960s. So since the 1960s, we have slowly been moving towards where we are today. Now, in Europe, I think the impetus for this is a combination of suddenly Europe, which has been historically quite homogeneous, from a perspective of skin color, not really, because South Europe and North Europe, but something, this is why race is such a bogus concept, suddenly got inundated with Africans and Arabs in the middle of the 20-teens. And add to that the European left's embrace of American identitarian theory with hostility to the other. What you're seeing in Europe is much more of whites resenting the immigrants, whites resenting the non-whites, less than in the United States, the non-whites identifying as non-white. So in America, much of the driver for this new trend was non-whites self-identifying in various ways as non-whites, separating themselves from the other, from whites, and academia supporting this and driving this. In Europe, I think it was more whites fearing the immigrants and the non-whites identifying, and that has driven the process. But you're absolutely right that the process exists in both US and Europe. It's just that the way it manifests itself is different in both places because of their histories. Hopefully that answers some of your questions. Andrew says, I know you wish the show was bigger, but I also think a big value of the show is the influence of the show on improving the quality of us objectivists Do you think the movement is getting healthier? Yeah, I definitely think the movement is getting healthier. It's friendlier, it's healthier, it's more open, it's more diverse, and people disagree. I think that's a healthy sign about application. Yeah, I think that the movement is definitely healthier. All right, guys, I'm going to call it a Sunday. I will see you guys tomorrow for 2 shows. One in the regular afternoon show, news hour, and then in the evening, we've got Gene Maroney on tomorrow. Don't miss that. It's always fascinating with Gene. Motivation through love. I love that topic. That is the best topic. It's super positive. So all you positive people out there who want positive, who relish positive, you should. This is the show for you. So see you all tomorrow. Bye, everybody.